It is, it's one of the most universally accepted, almost unquestioned truths in modern society.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if you are stressed about your finances, the obvious, undeniable solution is that you simply need to make more money. Right.
Right. That's the default setting for everyone.
Yeah, you need a raise, or you need to launch a side hustle, or you need to pivot to a better paying career. We have all deeply internalized this idea that raw income is the absolute, ultimate cure-all for financial anxiety.
We really have. I mean, we are conditioned from a very young age to chase the bigger paycheck, operating on the assumption that financial peace of mind is just, going to automatically arrive as a byproduct of a higher tax bracket.
Exactly.
But the data rarely supports that. It fundamentally challenges the entire narrative of modern ambition.
And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. Because what if that is entirely backwards? What if making more money actually isn't the solution to your financial problems at all, but just a way to, scale them up?
Which is a terrifying thought for a lot of people.
Right. But we are analyzing a set of sources today that outline a highly specific framework called the wealth architecture system. And the core claim of this material is incredibly bold.
Bold is an understatement.
Seriously.
Yeah.
It argues that it is literally impossible to stay broke if you follow its daily steps. Impossible.
Yeah, that is a massive promise to make to a reader.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. What is the actual core thesis here? If financial security isn't about the size of the paycheck coming in, what is the driving mechanism?
Well, the foundational shift here is moving your entire focus away from your income generation, right? And directing it toward your capital structure.
Structure, okay.
Yeah, the sources make a really critical distinction. Most people focus entirely on the velocity of what they earn, like how fast is the money coming in. But the truly wealthy focus on the architecture of how they capture and deploy those earnings.
So it's not about the starting salary.
Exactly. Behind almost every individual who builds lasting generational wealth, you will rarely find a reliance on a massive starting salary. Instead, what you find is a system.
A system running in the background.
Yes, a highly automated system running quietly in the background. And the psychological function of the system is to entirely eliminate what behavioral economists call decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue, which is basically the cognitive load of having to constantly choose to be responsible. It requires a tremendous amount of executive function to make optimal financial choices day after day, month after month.
And that executive function is a finite resource. It really is.
Oh, for sure.
If you have to wake up every single day and actively calculate your savings rate, or debate the merit of a discretionary purchase, or consciously choose to route money into an investment account, your brain simply gets tired.
Yeah, you just run out of gas.
Exactly. Human willpower is not designed for decades of sustained financial friction. So the wealth architecture system operates on the premise that if you have to actively decide to do the right thing with your money, you will eventually experience a lapse in judgment.
Because nobody is perfect all the time.
Right. So by building a rigid structure that automates your progress, you are extracting human error, emotional volatility, and just plain exhaustion from the equation entirely.
That makes so much sense. It basically front runs your own psychology.
Yeah.
You are making the decision once, so you never have to make it again.
You set it and forget it, literally.
Yeah. So for everyone listening with us right now, I want you to take a second and reflect on the reality of your own finances. When you analyze your financial trajectory, are you essentially relying on a lucky break?
A sudden massive liquidity event?
Right, like an unprecedented promotion or an inheritance? Or are your finances structurally engineered to deliver a predictable outcome? Because that is the central pivot of the material today.
It is.
We are moving from hoping for a mathematical anomaly to designing for absolute predictability.
And that pivot highlights exactly why our default financial behaviors so often betray us over a long enough time horizon. We rely on the very psychological traits that are statistically guaranteed to degrade over time.
Which introduces a really serious friction point, this trap of salary and motivation. Because the text points out that salary alone lacks the structural integrity to make you wealthy. And motivation alone lacks the endurance to sustain the discipline you need.
Yeah, we culturally treat motivation like it's this permanent, enduring state of being.
Like we can just grit our teeth forever.
Exactly, but in reality, it's an incredibly fleeting emotional response.
It really reminds me of trying to stick to a strict diet like a severe caloric deficit by sheer willpower while you happen to work in a bakery.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy.
Right, because you might be highly motivated on Monday morning, but by Thursday afternoon, surrounded by the constant ambient pressure of fresh pastries, decision fatigue sets in. Like the environment overwhelms the intention. You eat the cake.
You always eat the cake eventually.
Yeah.
The environment and the lack of structural boundaries will always overwhelm raw motivation in a war of attrition. And in the broader financial ecosystem, everyday consumer life is the bakery, algorithmic advertising, frictionless digital payments, the cultural pressure for lifestyle, signaling, all of these are the pastries.
They are everywhere.
If your only line of defense is waking up and feeling sufficiently motivated to retain your capital, the environment will methodically extract your wealth.
But let me push back on this premise just a bit,
Yeah.
mathematically speaking. Because a lot of people might look at this and think, sure, a defensive system is great for the middle class, but surely making $1 million a year fixes everything, right?
You would think so.
Like if I'm a surgeon pulling in over $1 million a year, I have a massive margin of error. A $10,000 impulsive mistake for someone making $50,000 is devastating. But for the millionaire, it's a rounding error. Can't a high enough earner simply out-earn their lack of discipline?
It is a logical assumption, but the source material counters that directly. And honestly, the empirical data regarding high net worth individuals backs it up completely.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We routinely see high-income earners, surgeons, corporate executives, specialized attorneys who possess immense cash flow but are practically living paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
Yeah, they are highly leveraged and incredibly vulnerable to any disruption in their income. The text explains that the danger lies in proportional lifestyle inflation. Absolute wealth isn't growing if your cash burn rate scales linearly with your compensation.
So they just continuously upgrade the bakery they work in.
That is exactly it. They are buying artisanal, organically sourced cake, yes, but they are fundamentally still losing the battle of capital retention.
That's fascinating.
Their margin of error doesn't actually increase because their baseline overhead expands to completely consume the new liquidity. Wealth is not the number printed on a W-2. Wealth is the accumulation of yielding assets over time.
Right.
Without a hardened structure to capture and redirect that income and capital, those dollars flow right back out into the economy, regardless of the volume coming in. The W-2 becomes an illusion of wealth, not the reality of it.
Okay, so if raw income can't save us, and motivation is a depreciating asset, we have to pivot to the actual mechanics of this framework. How does one structurally build this architecture to bypass the flaws of human willpower?
Right, getting into the gears of it.
Yeah, the engine of this system is something called the 20-60-10-10 rule. It's a very rigid architectural blueprint dictating the flow of every single dollar that hits your ledger. So let's isolate the first pillar, because this is the primary growth engine, allocating 20% of your income.
Yes, and the mandate here is absolute. The first 20% of all gross capital you capture is immediately sequestered for long-term growth and asset acquisition.
And the mechanism that makes this work, based on the text, is automation. Like you have to automate it.
You have to. It is non-negotiable.
You do not wait until the end of the month, assess your discretionary spending, and see if there happens to be 20% left over in the checking account.
Because there never will be.
Exactly. You automate the routing so the capital clears into investment vehicles before you can even mentally register its arrival. The source specifically details how these continuous automated allocations create compounding momentum.
Compounding momentum, yes.
Right, long before financial freedom is even visible. It's not just about compound interest. It's about the mathematical advantage of continuous capital deployment over trying to time the market with lump sums. You are relentlessly funding this machine regardless of market conditions.
And what's fascinating here is how the source breaks down the deployment strategy for that 20%.
Oh yeah, the latter.
Yeah, it doesn't just advocate for throwing it blindly into a brokerage account. It introduces this highly structured concept of the risk ladder.
So looking at how they describe this risk ladder, I'm assuming the trigger to move up a rung isn't based on age, right? Like a traditional target date retirement fund that just slowly shifts to bonds as you get older.
No, not at all.
It looks like it's based on a capitalization or liquidity threshold. So once rung A hits a specific dollar amount or yield metric, the automated overflow just naturally spills upward into rung B.
That is the exact mechanism. The risk ladder is a sequential method of structuring your capital allocation within that 20%. You do not start by exposing your capital to massive beta or asymmetric risk.
You have to build the base.
Right. You start at the foundational rung, which is focused entirely on absolute capital preservation and guaranteed returns.
So what does that look like in practice?
This means aggressively clearing high-interest consumer debt, which, let's be honest, is essentially a guaranteed double-digit return, or funneling the 20% into highly secure, low-yield instruments like treasury bills or sovereign bonds. You are building an indestructible floor.
You are buying baseline certainty. You are capitalizing the foundation so it literally cannot fracture.
Exactly. And only once that specific capitalization threshold is met, once that foundation is mathematically solid, does the automated 20% spill over to the next rung.
Okay, so then you move up.
Yeah. Now you step into slightly more aggressive market-correlated growth assets, broad market index funds, perhaps stable real estate investment trusts. You are seeking yield, but with high liquidity and historical stability. Got it. Then, once that second rung is sufficiently capitalized to sustain your long-term baseline goals, the capital naturally flows up again toward high ROI asymmetric opportunities.
Which would be individual equities, venture investments, direct real estate syndications, the high-risk, high-reward place.
Precisely.
The brilliance of this sequential laddering is that you are only ever taking on high risk once you have structurally guaranteed your base.
Yeah.
You're climbing upward, exposing yourself to massive upside. But because of the capitalization thresholds, you are mathematically insulated from falling all the way back to zero.
Yes.
The automation pushes you up the ladder systematically.
It completely decouples emotion from risk management. The structure dictates the risk exposure, entirely removing the panic of like a Tuesday market dip. But while the 20% growth engine is mathematically elegant, it creates an immediate tension for the present.
Right, the cash flow problem. Because if 20% of your capital vanishes the moment it hits your account, how does the system prevent you from accidentally overdrafting when rent is due?
People still have to live.
People still have fixed costs. And this brings us to the largest chunk of the allocation framework, the 60%.
The 60% cap on essentials. The system mandates that all of your foundational living expenses, housing, food, utilities, transportation, base insurance, must fit entirely within 60% of your total incoming cash flow.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The source material doesn't just present this as a budgeting tip. It positions this specific 60% ratio as the ultimate defense against lifestyle inflation traps.
Because lifestyle inflation is the quietest, most pervasive destroyer of absolute wealth. It's the natural human tendency to expand our baseline overhead to perfectly match our new liquidity.
It's the classic trap. You secure a promotion, your cash flow increases by 20%, and what happens? You immediately go out and lease a European luxury car.
Every single time.
You upgrade the apartment, and suddenly your new monthly fixed costs have risen to perfectly consume your new income. Your gross revenue is higher, but your proportional cash burn rate remains identical.
You feel richer, but you aren't.
You are functionally just as broke at the end of the month, operating with the exact same dangerous leverage ratio. You are still on the treadmill, you just happen to be sweating nicer leather seats.
Which is why the 60% cap operates as an absolute mathematical boundary rather than a suggestion.
It's a hard limit.
Yes. If your income goes up, your 60% allowance for essentials scales up proportionally, meaning you can upgrade your life, but it structurally prevents those upgrades from consuming the entire pie.
Ah, I see.
It forces a cognitive shift regarding lifestyle scaling. If you desire a larger mortgage or a premium vehicle lease, you have to mathematically prove it fits within that strict 60% cash flow boundary. If it breaches the cap, the transaction is rejected by the system.
The math acts as the ultimate arbiter.
Exactly, removing your ego from the decision-making process entirely.
So we have 20% locked away, building the future on the risk ladder, and 60% cap to keep a roof over our heads today without over-leveraging. That accounts for 80% of the capital pie. The next crucial layer the text introduces is the 10% stability fund.
And from a purely defensive standpoint, the importance of this specific 10% really cannot be overstated. This is not just a generic savings account. It is a dedicated, highly liquid stability reserve.
But looking at this critically, why separate it? Why not just expand the 60% essentials bucket to 70% and absorb unexpected costs there? Like, why the separate bucket?
Because the 60% bucket is designed to manage predictable, amortized expenses. The stability pool is explicitly designed to manage the unpredictable.
The source details how this 10% fund is the structural moat that prevents localized emergencies from entirely derailing the progress you've established in your 20% growth engine.
So it acts as a financial shock absorber. It's an explicitly defensive liquidity pool, so you don't have to raid your investments when the roof leaks. Without it, you're exposed to massive opportunity cost.
Precisely. Let's look at the mechanics of an emergency without this pool. If you experience a sudden massive capital expenditure, a severe medical crisis, or a catastrophic failure of a primary vehicle, and you lack a liquid stability fund, the impact transfers directly to your overarching financial frame.
You are forced into premature liquidation.
Exactly.
You have to raid the Tier 2 growth assets on your risk ladder, which means you are potentially triggering massive capital gains taxes, or worse, you are forced to sell equities during a prolonged market dip, locking in a substantial loss just to cover a temporary cash flow crisis.
Which sets you back years.
Or you take on high-interest unsecured debt. Right, so the 10% stability fund acts as that shock absorber. When you hit a massive pothole in life, the stability pool takes the kinetic energy of that sudden expense and dissipates it entirely.
You just pay for it and move on.
Yeah, you resolve the crisis using cash that was specifically sitting in a high-yield, deeply liquid account waiting for that exact moment. Because of that buffer, your compounding momentum in the 20% growth bucket remains completely uninterrupted. You don't trigger tax events and you don't absorb market losses.
It completely protects the structural integrity of the entire architecture. Okay, so running the math on the allocation, we have 20% aggressively pursuing growth, 60% managing our baseline reality, and 10% deployed as a defensive liquidity pool. That adds up to 90%. We are left with exactly 10% of our incoming capital.
The final 10%.
I know exactly what the hyper-optimizers listening to this are thinking right now.
Oh, I know too.
They are looking at that remaining 10% and calculating the lost yield. They want to instantly reroute that capital into the 20% growth pile, effectively creating a 30% growth engine to drastically accelerate their timeline to financial independence.
Now, of course they do.
But the text explicitly warns against doing that.
It does. It strictly reserves that final 10% for an entirely different and honestly somewhat counterintuitive purpose.
The enjoyment fund.
Yep.
The final 10% is mandated, guilt-free spending on whatever brings you immediate gratification in the present moment. Premium dinners out, travel, depreciating assets, hobbies. When I first reviewed this, it felt completely incongruous with the rest of the text.
Feels like it breaks the rules, right?
Yeah. If the ultimate objective is absolute wealth accumulation, why is the architecture demanding that we intentionally burn 10% of our capital on fleeting enjoyment?
This raises an important question, and it really gets to the core of why so many rigid financial plans ultimately collapse. The text pivots here to focus heavily on the behavioral economics and the psychology sustaining the system. Think back to our earlier discussion about the limits of motivation and the reality of decision fatigue.
The bakery environment.
The bakery environment. If you design a financial architecture that is 100% mathematically optimized for future growth and maximum efficiency, but it allows for zero present-day gratification, that system ceases to feel like a tool. It feels like a prison.
Wow. Yeah.
And human psychology dictates that we do not voluntarily remain in prisons for very long.
We experience frugal fatigue. The deprivation builds resentment until we inevitably orchestrate a breakout.
Exactly. If you systematically deprive yourself of all present moment joy in the name of future optimization, your underlying motivation decays. Eventually, you reach a breaking point, a psychological snap.
And then what happens?
You abandon the architectural framework entirely and embark on a massive, highly destructive spending binge simply to reclaim a feeling of autonomy over your own labor.
Just to feel in control again.
Right. So, the source material argues brilliantly that this 10% enjoyment fund is not a waste of capital. It is the structural glue that ensures the longevity of the entire framework.
Because it acts as a pressure release valve. It is the secret ingredient that makes consistently following the system sustainable, thus making staying broke impossible.
Yes. By mathematically mandating that you consume 10% of your income purely for joy, you entirely eliminate the psychological guilt associated with consumption.
Because it's part of the plan.
Exactly. While simultaneously removing the feeling of deprivation associated with aggressive saving. You are permitted to enjoy the fruits of your labor today, operating with the absolute mathematical certainty that your long-term future is actively compounding and your downside risk is covered by your stability pool.
Brilliant.
It makes the act of consistently following the system feel effortless over a multi-decade time horizon. And that sustained consistency is exactly what makes staying broke an impossibility.
It's not just a capital allocation spreadsheet. It's a sophisticated behavioral modification tool. It leverages human nature instead of fighting a losing battle against it.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and evaluate this 20-60-10-10 wealth architecture system in its totality, the most profound takeaway for me is that building real multi-generational financial security isn't about hoping for a massive salary bump.
Not at all.
It's about seizing control of the mechanics. It's about splitting every single dollar you touch with ruthless intention so that you completely remove the cognitive load of decision fatigue from your daily life.
You automate the hard parts.
Right. You automate 20% to systematically climb the risk ladder and build compounding momentum. You cap your baseline essentials at 60%, so proportional lifestyle inflation doesn't secretly devour your rising income. You deploy a 10% stability pool to act as a liquid moat against forced asset liquidation. And you deliberately consume 10% on present-day joy, so you actually possess the psychological endurance to keep playing the game.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound philosophical shift here is moving from a mindset of constant financial reaction to a mindset of intentional architectural design.
Intentional design, I like that.
When you truly grasp how capital is accumulated and protected, when you stop agonizing over the sheer volume of what you earn and start relentlessly obsessing over the structure of how you direct it, financial security ceases to be an opaque mystery.
It's no longer just luck.
Right. It ceases to be an anomaly that only happens to other people. It becomes a deeply boring, highly predictable outcome of a daily, step-by-step, mathematically sound structure.
A deeply predictable outcome.
Yeah.
The math makes the decision for you.
It really does.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. But I want to leave you with a final, lingering question to ponder on your own as you navigate the rest of your week.
Something to think about.
Yeah. Take a hard look at your own capital flow. If you pulled up your bank ledger right now, does it reflect a rigid system of intentional architectural allocation? Or does it look like a chaotic, reactionary timeline of exhausted emotional decisions?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. And more importantly, what would physically change in your life if you applied this 20-60-10-10 architecture to just the very next dollar you earn? We hope this analysis sparked a new perspective for you today. Keep questioning the defaults, keep building your architecture, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.